Oh man. Welcome to the second day of 12 days of anime movies. Today, I'm going to be reviewing the movie Weathering with You. This movie came out in 2019 in Japan and 2020 in the US. Before quarantine, this was the last movie I ever saw in theaters, and I went to see it twice. Weathering with You is, at the time of the upload of this video, the latest movie from director Makoto Shinkai, who also directed the movie Your Name, one of the highest grossing movies in the Japanese market. Your Name is a fantastic movie, and trust me, I'll gush about it later this month. But it's also part of the Shinkai formula. Makoto Shinkai is known for making visually stunning movies, but they often follow similar plot structures. Love is generally at the center of these stories, and it's usually star-crossed. A lot of the times, at least one of the protagonists is also a teenager. But, save for maybe one of his other movies, love is always generally played up as a positive force. So, when I went to go see this movie for the first time, I was shocked. This is definitely still a Shinkai movie, but perhaps one with a different message than the rest. Weathering with You tells the story of a teenage boy named Hodoka who runs away from home to Tokyo, and an orphan teenage girl named Hina who can control the weather. When their fates intertwine, they work together to bring happiness, and also get money, to Tokyo during an especially rainy season by changing the weather. A fireworks show is able to be put on from new sunlight, and a girl with asthma is able to play outside. But messing with the natural order has its consequences, and these problems end up compounding with the two protagonists' living situations. In terms of plot, Your Name had an emphasis on mythology, with elements of the real world thrown in as a backdrop. Weathering with You is sort of an inverse of that. The weather power is important, but what is even more important is the city of Tokyo. While Your Name portrayed Tokyo as an idealized version of beauty, as a sort of way to show beauty in a metropolitan world, Weathering with You's Tokyo is decidedly more pessimistic. Hodoka is approached by several swindlers on the street, a lot of the citizens are mean-spirited, and the constant downpour of rain brings the mood down. It's a more realistic Tokyo, which helps to separate the movie from its predecessor. This does lead to one notable problem, though. With a constant realistic setting, there's more opportunities for product placement. Now, product placement in films is fine. They do need to get financed after all. However, there's a scene in the movie where Hodoka gets a Big Mac from Hina after almost starving to death, and then he calls it the greatest meal I've ever eaten in my life. Like, really? I think the intention was, like, someone was finally nice to him, so the meal made him happy, and it's like their first meeting. But it's always hampered down by the fact that it's a Big Mac and a huge ad for McDonald's. Product placement should never be tied directly into the movie's plot, and that's what this scene was. That's the only really bad scene with product placement, though. The only other product placement I can recall is some beers from a vending machine and billboards for companies. It is a more realistic Tokyo, but it's really clear that's not why they got the product placement for the movie. Speaking of Tokyo, though, I'd be remiss to not mention this movie's visuals. Like you'd expect from a Shinkai movie, the set pieces are beautiful. The rain flows down beautifully, with each drop painstakingly crafted, putting down a spectacle. The city can be gray and depressing, or full of color from the sun, depending on the mood of the movie. There's one thing I think everyone agrees on about this movie, it's that the animation is super impressive. Looks can only get a movie so far, but I feel the film also excels in one other important area. The characters are all really enjoyable to watch. Hina is a really charming girl who wants to do good for the world, and her brother Nagi is also really funny. Nagi is a ladies' man despite him being like 10, and serves as Hodoka's wingman. Hodoka gets taken in by a man named Keisuke and his assistant Natsumi. Shinkai made sure to stress Keisuke heavily in the movie, and calls him a key person in an interview. Keisuke acts as a sort of reflection of Hodoka. He grew up with the same wild tendencies as Hodoka, which is likely why he takes him in. He's burdened by a struggling company, grief for his wife, and a desire to reconnect with his daughter, though his mother-in-law tries to prevent this from happening. You feel for him, and later on, when his values get tested at the cost of an important relationship, you understand his choice. But then, there's the main boy, Hodoka. His relationship with Hina is extremely fun to watch develop. They have really good chemistry, and their affections for each other feel natural. Hodoka, however, isn't the most likable person. At the core of his character, he's just a stupid teenage boy who runs recklessly into situations without much forethought, just like how he ran away from home. And I think that's actually to the movie's benefit. In this more realistic Tokyo, Hodaka's attitude makes sense. Hodaka's reckless decisions don't solve the problems forever and end up compounding onto the existing conflict. A lot of this movie is his fault, and he gets caught up in his own romantic fantasies. Romantic fantasies? Aren't those the movies Shinkai makes? Movies meant to be romantic escapes from reality? That's what I think separates this movie from almost all the rest of his others. This is not a romantic fantasy. Romance is a selfish force in this movie, and it has heavy costs. In terms of theming, this movie has an obvious extended metaphor of putting the woes of climate change on the youth, but I think that's obvious enough to not explain. The themes about love, however, can't really be explained without the ending. I'm going to get into spoilers now, so you can skip to the timecode below if you don't want to be spoiled for the ending. Hodaka, Hina, and Nagi end up running away from the police. Hodaka runs because he's already a runaway, and the other two are orphans living unsupervised. It was here I realized something. Hodaka has nothing to run away from at home. The movie never implies he was abused or neglected. He just found his condition suffocating. Once again, running away to Tokyo is just one of his wild fantasies. The right thing to do probably would have been just to go to the police, but he wouldn't accept that, so he keeps running, and Hina's weather manipulation finally catches up with her. Tokyo's rain comes down even further now, and as explained in the movie, the only way to fix it is to sacrifice herself. She does this thinking the good weather will make Hodaka happy, and she ends up in this mysterious world. She's being attacked by these waterfish and ends up crying in pain from her sacrifice. Hodaka wakes up to find her gone and gets taken in by the police, but he ends up running away from them once again. Unlike most movies, the climax of this one takes place in broad daylight. Since we've seen rain for mostly the entire movie, the daylight is actually off-putting, and creates a clever contrast with other traditional films where dark weather is generally the weather used for a climax. So, what the audience expects is that Hodaka will find a way to bring Hina back and also appease the gods. And then the movie should end happily ever after, right? The weather can stay crazy, he yells. I want you more than any blue sky. Hodaka gets Hina back, and the rain returns. And then there's a 3-year time skip, and Tokyo is flooded? Keisuke's daughter with asthma. She's going to be stuck inside again. Several people's livelihoods probably got displaced. But wait, the movie goes out of its way to say nature was always going to reclaim this land. Nah, Hodaka rejects that in the ending. He knows what happened was because of him and Hina. After 3 years, they finally see each other again. Hodaka says, we'll be alright, and then the movie ends. Whoa. As Shinkai himself said, not everyone will agree with this ending. How could they do that, they might think. And in the way, they're right. The better outcome would have been for Hina to stay in the sky, and the weather would have stayed fine. But near the end of the movie, when Hodaka is close to reaching Hina to rescue her from the gods, he's almost stopped by the police. But Keisuke is there. He sees Hodaka's sadness and desperation, and it reminds him of his dead wife. He knows the feeling of doing whatever it takes to see someone again. Keisuke stops the police so Hodaka can have the happiness that Keisuke himself used to have. Hodaka finally gets that happiness, 5 years later. Love is selfish for sure, but it's also such an empowering feeling that the characters are willing to go through incredible lengths just to achieve it. Love gave Hodaka courage and the true purpose to live for. It caused Keisuke to sacrifice his possible happiness for Hodaka, and ultimately helped him grow into a better person. Love can blind us to reality, but it can also make us stronger. It leads to the question, should we try to help society, or should we reject that idea and instead pursue our own happiness? What's the right answer? That's for you to decide. There are a lot of other things to talk about with this movie, like the music for one thing. But for me, The core of Weathering with You are its visuals and the messages it chooses to tell. Messages about nature, messages about sacrifice, messages about immaturity, and a choice for the audience. Is love worth sacrificing for? Does love push the other people around you away? I don't know the answer yet. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. But either way, this movie gives you a lot to think about while also looking dazzling. I cannot recommend Weathering with You enough, and I know I'll be back to watch it again. Okay, that was pretty deep. So, what's next? Oh, Summer Wars. This should be fun.